Yeah. Hello. So you'll notice that I'm nicely dressed tonight in comparison to a few of my other videos. I got myself a bit of a fashion person to help me out, which sometimes us less fashionable like. I left my whiteboard marker. So you'll notice if you watched my previous videos, I did one on called "What's a Problem?" It was a bit confronting for me. It took me a while to get that one. It might even been one of the first ones that I did. And since then, I've been doing a lot of work because that one really stumped me. Sort of like, well, I'd never noticed it before. I don't think I'd noticed it as much as I guess I did. And then, so I started playing the game opinion versus fact. So what I really got was, if there's no problems, they're all opinions. So I have an opinion about whether something's a problem or not. And then I went to opinion versus fact, and that got me a little bit further, but it really I started to notice that a lot of stuff, like really started to question like the nature of reality. And one of the biggest challenges we face in regards to artificial intelligence. And one of the particular networks that I like is the generational adversarial network. So it's essentially like a synthetic imagination. You probably already know that, but for the people that don't, that's what it really looks like in a very, very summed up version. Essentially, you've got one neural network that's trained, one neural network that isn't, and the one that isn't trains itself against the one that is to see if it can generate stuff to trick the other network. The challenge with a generational adversarial network or any kind of synthetic imagination is that it doesn't seem to be a lot of check with what's actually real. And this is sort of a pretty far out there challenge to like how we think, how much of our reality is actually made up by our imagination. And I noticed that doing this was sort of like, how deep does the rabbit hole go? Which is why I haven't posted in a really long time, because I spent a lot of time learning about, different versions of reality. How you might, for instance, what's the fundamental flaws of generational adversarial networks? What's the fundamental flaws of current, just normal view reality, teach reality networks? And one of the things that was really interesting when I did this work was how limiting the decision tree is. So, for instance, if the network understands the world from the perspective of cats and dogs, it doesn't really see the world in any other way. And really, in the end, the patterns, so that whatever the pattern is that makes up cat and dog, the cat and dog's the opinion. Now, I get that doesn't get us very far. Right? I'm probably not sharing as much stuff as I'd like to be sharing some answers here. But I think that this is the fundamental challenge that we've got, which is how do you mix what is there with imagination? And if you go and watch a lot of philosophical things, a lot of, maybe I've watched some movies about philosophical stuff like vision, how much of our vision is actually made up? And how much of it's what's actually there? And I'm not sure that our brain can tell the difference. Like, some of the research says that the brain doesn't actually understand the difference between right and wrong. That we can cognitively decide that. But even simple things like, for instance, you'll notice that some people have an opinion that other people are wrong, except there's no right and wrong between two people. And in the world of anything's possible, in the world of imagination, to say that one thing's wrong over the other is probably, it's like a wasteful argument. And I often use the example, I probably talked about this previously, which is the example of what's the difference between someone who invented the helicopter, someone who thinks the Earth's flat, and someone who believes is an anti-vaxxer, or someone who's against the vaccinations. And there's a bunch of different ways that people answer this question, but one of the ones that they answer is, well, the helicopter's real and the other two aren't. And that what's missing there is the understanding of the difference in, let's establish first of all that all three at some point had never been thought up. In other words, they were completely imaginary. What's the difference once you get across the line? What's the thought process that we go to from something doesn't exist to something actually existing? And if you look at things like the scientific method, it gives us a little bit of a hint about how important it is to manage our own imagination, how important it is to check our imagination with reality, because how much of our reality is actually made up. And but one of the biggest things people miss is how ridiculous it would be. It would think if the helicopter didn't, hadn't been invented today. Could you imagine describing it as a chainsaw flying in the sky while I sit underneath it? Because that's really all it is. It's this giant blade spinning around at some ungodly speed while a bunch of people sit underneath it and fly around in it. And if it crashes, not only is it going to probably chop up everyone inside and turn into a giant fireball, but it's going to kill probably a lot of people on the ground as well. And that's where I'm up to. Because so much of our reality, we don't even realise that we have this predetermined bias. And the challenge with that is when you play the opinion versus fact game, even the fact that this is called a whiteboard mark is an opinion, because it's called something else somewhere else, that we agree that this is a whiteboard marker is an important thing for you and I and other people to communicate with. But if your English isn't your first language and you're watching this, you'll have a different name for this. And it's an opinion that's a whiteboard marker. It's not a fact, just like it's an opinion that's a cat and not a dog. It's not a fact. We made those things up. You and I agree that these words mean something. And it's quite a confronting thing for us to get, but Einstein had, and I don't know whether Einstein actually said this or not, but there's this famous saying that says, solving a problem can't be used the same way. You can't solve a problem using the same thinking that created it. And for us to solve this actual smart, conscious artificial intelligence is really going to take a lot of work. Well, it has taken me a lot of work to actually unravel all the things that are there that has me not see what's actually there. And what I mean by that is actually get how much of my world is made up to see, okay, what is actually there and what's the process? What's the process between me detecting this with my eyes and me knowing that this is a whiteboard marker? That gap is the big challenge, because we've got this ability to imagine a reality. We've got the ability to detect a whiteboard marker. But what's the gap? What's the bit that makes this a whiteboard marker? What gives me the ability to imagine a whiteboard marker? What's the thought process? And it's quite a challenging process. It's like every now and again you'll notice it and then it disappears. And you think you've got it, and it's another thing that's you've got to get through. And so that's what I'm currently working on, and it's worthwhile to actually consider these two things, because you actually start to see how big of a challenge we've got in working out certain things. There's other things, like for instance, one of the challenges that I'm currently trying to work out is, why do we know we exist? It's like, why do we know that this is one? And I know that it's a question we've been asking for a really long time, but it's one that I believe we're attempting to ask with artificial intelligence. We're going to need to ask to be able to create artificial intelligence that's as smart as us. And maybe it's not possible, but at least I'd like to try. It's a fun thought process. It's a fun thing to challenge your own mind around, well, why is that the case? I haven't been able to find a mathematical proof for the number one. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But it seems like we intrinsically understand one. Why is that? What mathematics could we use to replicate that? We've got the mathematics to think up an opinion. We've got the mathematics. We haven't got the mathematics to notice what a problem is, because there's no understanding of perspective. That's another thing to look at, is that several different people all viewing the same thing have a different perspective. And then you throw on top of that, and perspective, i.e. the actual detection of reality, what actually happened. and then the imagination that goes on top of it, their embedded biases, the things that they noticed, the things that they didn't, the things that they're interested in, the other things that other people aren't interested in. What are those things? What's the mathematics around that? Why are we so unbelievably similar and in a lot of ways different? The best guess so far is imagination, but what's the mathematics for that? Because there has to be some attachment to a reality to function and be able to communicate with people. But at some point, we disconnect, which is what the generational adversarial network is. There's a complete disconnection from what's actually going on. I'll be back at some point soon, hopefully with better answers than that.